I've traveled with Ranger, my border collie, for years, and he has never hesitated at a doorway, not once. But that night at the Redwood Rest Lodge, he stopped cold and looked at me like he desperately wanted me to stay out. I pulled into the motel just after sunset. The place sat on the shoulder of Highway 97, like a memory someone forgot to replace. The wooden sign leaned to one side, a porch light buzzed faintly, and a cluster of pines softened the noise of passing trucks. It was June of 2021, and the air had that hot, damp smell of cut grass mixed with old road tar. Sarah and I had been driving since dawn, with too much in the trailer and not enough sleep behind us. Every muscle in my back felt tight, and all I wanted was a bed that didn't vibrate with highway hum. Ranger rode shotgun the whole way with his chin between the seats like he was studying the road. He's the kind of dog who notices small changes. He pays attention to things that slide right past people. When I opened the car door, he stiffened as if someone had flicked a switch in him. Sarah noticed it too. She tried to brush it off, saying it might just be the new sounds or the long drive, but even she looked unsure. She kept a towel around her shoulders and gave me a tired smile, the kind she uses when she's trying to keep a moment calm. Inside the office, the manager handed over the key to room 12 without much conversation. He was a quiet, worn-out man, the type who looked like he'd traded his youth for the building's problems. Ranger watched him closely, not aggressively, just with that fixed attention he gives something he can't categorize. The manager mentioned that old buildings hold on to a lot of smells. He said it like he'd used that explanation many times before. The hallway lights flickered as we walked to the room, the kind of slow pulse old fluorescent bulbs give off. Inside, everything looked normal. The room smelled faintly of cleaner, sitting on top of mildew. The comforter had survived too many seasons. The carpet had that padded, tired look, common in roadside motels. Nothing special, nothing threatening. But Ranger went straight to the left wall behind the headboard and sat down. No sniffing around the edges of the room, no exploring the corners like he usually does. Just a direct, focused sit, nose pointed at the baseboard. I joked that he probably caught a leftover smell from a previous guest. Sarah tried to laugh, but her eyes stayed on him. She said he might just be unsettled from the long drive. She always tries to soften moments that feel off. We unpacked slowly. Sarah showered while I checked the route on my phone. Ranger kept returning to the same spot with a kind of patience that made the room feel smaller. He put his nose to the wall and inhaled in a long, steady draw, then pulled back like he was filing the scent away for later. At first, I tried to convince myself it could be mice. That's what logical people say when they don't want to think about anything else. But Ranger's body language wasn't rodent-wary. It was something closer to the way he behaves around unfamiliar human scents. There's a difference, and you feel it more than see it. At around 2 in the morning, his growl woke me up, a deep, low vibration that pushed right into my ribs. Ranger stood rigid on the bed between Sarah and me, staring at that same wall. His tail was tucked tightly, and his breathing was sharp and fast. Then I heard it. A faint scraping sound, slow, precise, like someone shifting their weight inside a tight space. The tone of it, the soft friction, sent a cold ripple across my skin. Sarah whispered that she heard it too. Her voice was tense, trying not to make the moment real. The sound came again, closer than before. Ranger let out one sharp bark, not a warning bark to scare an animal away. A different kind of bark, the kind that slices the quiet into before and after. I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the wall. At first there was nothing, just the thick silence of old insulation. Then a soft exhale, a scrape, and then 3 taps. Gentle, deliberate, like someone knocking from the inside. I tapped back because that's what you do when fear and embarrassment collide. I asked if someone was there even though I didn't want an answer. The tapping stopped immediately. The quiet that followed felt heavy, like it had weight. Ranger pressed against my leg and trembled. We didn't sleep much after that. When the sun came up, we tried to rationalize the night. Maybe a loose pipe, Maybe animals, maybe the building settling. But each explanation felt like something we were forcing onto the situation, rather than something that fit naturally. At breakfast, Ranger wouldn't take his favorite treat. He stayed close to the door and kept sniffing the seam between the baseboard and the floor when we returned to pack. His behavior had gone from alert to insistent. When I walked back into the room, I noticed a small detail I had missed the night before. One screw on the outlet plate near the bed sat at an odd angle. It was the kind of thing you might ignore forever, if not for the feeling in your stomach that tells you a detail is actually important. Ranger touched his nose to the baseboard, stepped back, and stared at me as if urging me toward the same conclusion he'd already reached. I took out a screwdriver and removed the plate. Behind it was a small hollow, bigger than it should have been. No insulation, no wiring, just empty space large enough for a hand to slip through. Discovering a hollow where none should be is a strange feeling. It's subtle, but deeply unsettling. It means someone has been where they shouldn't, I told the manager quietly. He paled slightly, but called the sheriff right away. Deputy Harper arrived with a calm focus that suggested he'd seen stranger things. He examined the opening and asked if we'd heard noises. I told him we had. Ranger stayed glued to my side, watching the far end of the room as if waiting for something to shift. The deputies opened a maintenance panel in the hallway. Dust fell out in thick clumps, and behind it stretched a narrow crawl space running the length of the building. Inside were signs of recent occupation: blankets, a thermos, a small lantern, and a worn paperback. It wasn't large, but imagining someone tucked into that cramped space listening to guests through the walls made something in my stomach twist. They found footprints in the dust. Small, intentional. They found fibers matching ones inside our outlet pocket. No identification, no match in the system. Harper told us to pack our things and stay somewhere else for a few days. The manager looked devastated, apologizing in a quiet voice that suggested this wasn't the first time life had blindsided him. We left with more questions than clarity. Police worked the area for weeks. No suspects surfaced. No arrest. Just an unresolved tension that lingered in the back of my mind. We tried to move on, at least on the surface. In the weeks after Redwood, I fell into new habits without meaning to. I checked outlet plates when we stayed somewhere overnight. I pressed along seams of baseboards as if routine could keep danger away. Fear has a way of inventing rituals. Small actions become temporary anchors. Sarah suggested we install a small indoor camera at home. She said it might help us sleep better, knowing the nights were being recorded. I agreed because exhaustion wants reassurance. Ranger adjusted to the camera quickly. He would glance at the glowing lens sometimes, tail wagging slowly, then return to his usual routines. But at night, he often paused near the living room wall, like he was remembering where danger once hid. Most days were uneventful. We watched footage occasionally, and it captured nothing strange. Just normal slices of life. Sarah folding laundry, Ranger chasing a sunbeam, me staring into the fridge too long. Those ordinary moments acted like bandages. But the dreams didn't stop. I would wake up convinced I had heard scraping again, convinced I felt someone on the other side of our drywall. My mind kept replaying scenarios of someone slipping in and out without leaving a trace. I wanted to believe it was just a tired brain, stretched too thin. 3 weeks later, Harper called. He said they found similar fibers and partial prints in another motel across town. The pattern suggested someone had been moving through crawl spaces along the highway. Someone who used gaps in old buildings the way hikers use trails. Someone who left as soon as they sensed attention. The investigation widened. Deputies contacted motels in neighboring towns, checked maintenance records, reached out to outreach centers and shelters. A picture formed, blurred but increasingly real. Whoever had stayed behind our wall moved quietly, avoided confrontation, and lived in forgotten spaces. During that stretch of uncertainty, Sarah and I had conversations I'd avoided before. What we would do if the person was dangerous, how we would protect ourselves. She talked calmly through practical plans. I realized how much I leaned on her steadiness when my own thoughts were scattered. We agreed on simple routines: lock doors every time, keep a light on at night, leave the camera recording whenever we left the house. Then Harper called again, and his tone had changed. A man had been seen slipping into a maintenance hatch near an abandoned motel 3 towns away. Deputies found the crawl space used recently. Blankets, food wrappers, the kind of setup we saw at Redwood. They didn't find the man, but they found a sketch tucked under the bedding. A simple pencil drawing of a face. Not detailed, more like something drawn from memory or habit. On the inside margin were 3 words written in a small, uneven hand. I liked the quiet. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like an explanation, which somehow felt worse. It gave the anonymous presence a voice, a motive, a preference. And that made me feel exposed in a new way. Sheriff's offices along the route increased patrols. Motels started checking maintenance panels. Notices were posted encouraging guests to report anything unusual. It was surreal watching small practical changes unfold because of something that had crept so close to us. Then came weeks of silence. Life settled into a strange balance. Work, errands, late walks with Ranger. He seemed calmer. Some nights he paced briefly at 2 in the morning, doing what felt like perimeter checks, then settled again. But the dreams continued for me. Fear has its own operating system and doesn't uninstall easily. One morning, Harper called with a lead. A woman at a thrift store recognized a jacket she had repaired with a unique thread. The buyer had been a lanky man who paid cash. It was a thin strand of information, but investigations often move on strands. Deputies checked with outreach centers, shelters, and people who traded or sold belongings. For a few days, it felt like the story might finally take shape. Then the lead went cold. The man had moved on. It leaves you uneasy when a story refuses to resolve. You hold pieces of someone's life, but not the person. You know enough to be afraid, but not enough to be certain. 3 months later, I got a voicemail from Harper. There had been an arrest downstate, unrelated burglary charges, but among the items in the suspect's storage unit were things that chilled me. A lantern identical to the one found at Redwood, a thermos with a sticker from an old motel, a wallet belonging to a transient who once used a false name at a shelter. It wasn't proof, but it was close enough to feel like a gust of cold air. Harper asked me to visit the station and look over the items. I went because the fear of never knowing felt heavier than whatever I might see. At the station, a deputy laid everything out. There was a small notebook with folded pages. Half the entries were rough sketches of vents and ceiling seams. On one page, the number 12 was written near a drawing of a wall pocket. That struck me harder than I expected. There wasn't enough evidence to charge the suspect for what happened in our room, but they were building a case for trespassing and burglary across multiple sites. The deputy told me something quietly, something that didn't make the formal report. The suspect had a pattern of slipping into places no one checked and leaving without confrontation. No violent incidents on record, no clear threats. Just a person living in overlooked gaps of society and infrastructure. But the deputy added one more sentence. He said the behavior still represented danger because anyone who hides in seams and watches strangers sleep occupies a level of intimacy that shouldn't exist. I stepped outside afterward and took a long breath, like I was trying to clear something from my chest. When I got home, Ranger came to me with that slow, steady recognition dogs have when you aren't okay. He rested his head on my foot that night. I stayed close to Sarah. In the months that followed, I learned to live with the new awareness. The sheriff recommended some improvements for Redwood. Tom, the manager, replaced outlet plates, sealed seams, and installed tamper-resistant screws. The office posted a small sign advising guests to report odd noises. Those practical changes made the world feel like it had tried, at least a little, to protect itself. At home, we kept the indoor camera for nearly a year. Mostly it caught harmless things, animals passing by, headlights sweeping across windows. Once, late at night, a man in a hood walked past the house and looked toward our window. For a moment, it triggered every old fear. The sheriff ran the footage, but nothing came of it. People sometimes ask whether we pressed charges. The answer is complicated. We gave statements. We cooperated. But the law needs hard evidence, not fear, not instinct. Trespass and hidden occupation fall into gray areas when no direct harm is documented. Still, the experience changed how I see the world. I check outlet plates more than I should. I pay attention to small sounds. I understand now how thin the barrier between private life and unseen strangers can be. Ranger aged a little but stayed sharp. When we travel, I listen to him. If he pauses at a wall or studies a seam, I take it seriously. That's not paranoia, that's pattern recognition. About a year later, we passed the Redwood exit again. The sign still leaned, but someone had painted it. The porch light still buzzed. The maintenance panels looked newer. We slowed down, not to revisit the past, but out of quiet respect for what happened. Sarah joked that I check screws more than any sane person should. Ranger sat upright in the back, alert and patient, as if he understood the weight of certain places. If there's a moral, it isn't clean. Pay attention to what changes. Trust your pet's instincts. Look at the seams of places you take for granted. Some spaces look empty until they aren't. Some people sleep where no one expects them to. What stays with me most isn't fear, it's gratitude. A dog smelled something wrong and reacted. That single moment shifted everything. It kept someone from being inches behind a wall while we slept. Sometimes I still think about the what-ifs. What if Ranger had been asleep? What if we hadn't noticed the screw? What if I had ignored the sound? Those thoughts linger like small stones in a pocket. Weight you carry without meaning to. But most nights, when Ranger lies by the door and Sarah settles in beside me, I feel something steadier. A reminder that attention is a kind of protection. I still wonder what would have happened if Ranger hadn't smelled it first.